Today, Brightin Star 50mm 0.95. That's very difficult for me to pronounce, but Brightin Star 0.95 50mm lens is the hero of the day, and whenever I hear this name Brightin Star, this song comes to my mind, like, well honey, you are my brightening star. So anyways, Brightin Star 50mm 0.95 is an interesting lens. It's a Chinese lens, it's a cheap lens, so there are flaws to this lens, and not because it's Chinese and not because it's cheap, but because like it's very difficult to make a really good cheap 0.95 lens. Despite all the flaws, of course I will leave it for the end of this video recording, but despite of its flaws that are obvious, this lens can actually be used to the benefit of a photographer. This lens can be used as an extra 50mm lens in your bag with great success. But let's talk about it step by step. First of all, build quality. Build quality is completely okay. It's a metal lens, it's heavy, it's well made. There's nothing really to complain about here. Maybe two things. One thing is this nonsense, thing here, because like it's like this shade thing, but when you put a filter on it, then it not only blocks a little bit itself, but it also like makes the f-stop switch a little clunky, so that's not ideal. So when you take off the filter, which I use because we live in southern Portugal, which is very bright, so we always use some kind of filter in bright light, then you have this thingy here that is not detachable. Please, in version 2, make it detachable, and this design is just silly, and then everything works flawlessly. Okay, so this is my only complaint. And maybe second one, it could have a built-in chip inside to just inform that this is this lens and what aperture the photo was taken with. So this would be a nice addition. Nothing necessary there because it's a fully manual lens, but it would be nice to have it. This lens is available for RF mount, Z mount, E mount, Sigma L, and Fuji X mount, which is awesome because like you have variety of cameras to use this lens with. So now let's talk about optical performance. First of all, this lens is sharp in the center at 0.95, but the contrast is not great. But the sharpness is there. When you go to the corners, it's a mess. It's like there's no sharpness at all, there's no contrast. So at 0.95, this is a lens good for portrait work. So you want to shoot a portrait, and this is where this lens shines. And you get this, crazy vintage looking bokeh. At 1.4, the situation gets slightly better. In the center, more contrast. In the corner, still a little messy. At f2, it starts to be reasonable all over, frame, but at 2.8, it really starts to be really fine. But again, 0.95, it's a specific type of lens that is designed mainly for portrait work. So the sharpness in the middle is quite okay actually, so you can actually take good portraits at 0.95, so that's a good news. Now let's talk about distortion. There's a lot of barrel distortion, which was a surprise to me because at 50mm I would expect less distortion or different kind of distortion, but it's obvious. When talking about distortion, let's talk about the vignetting. And vignetting is pretty huge at 0.95. So again, this is typically viewed as an optical flaw. However, like with modern post-production techniques, you can still use it with quite success at 0.95. Take some nice shots, nice portraits there, no problem. But if you want something more like reliable, 1.4 would be a better choice, definitely. This lens also can come pretty close to the object at 50 centimeters. That's what I think it is. Like macro photography, of course, it's not designed for macro, but close-up photography is like at 0.95, practically unusable. I mean, it's very dreamy, so you can make a use of it, but optically it's pretty horrible. It's one of the worst I've ever seen, but that's okay because this lens is not designed to work in these parameters. So if you want a close-up photo and some decent and reasonable image quality, switch to 1.4 minimum, but recommended 2. At 2 it starts to be really usable, and that's where this lens starts to work with close-up. So as you can see, you have to know how to navigate and how to use this lens. Now let's talk about work against harsh light. And well, it's pretty interesting. Like the effect is like that the flares are all over the place. It's pretty, like, it's a circus. It's a circus. You never know what to expect. So I mean, it's not good. It's not good. However, later in samples I'll show you that you can use it to your benefit, or even now take a look at yourself. Like there's we took some actually professional photos with these lenses, like client work. We did some client work with this lens, and working against the light creates some interesting results, because this, to my taste, is what this lens is designed for, to create something different than a super controlled, high quality 50mm 1.4 professional lens. When it comes to star, it lives up to its name of a brightening star. So my brightening star creates a beautiful stars at f11 and more, and even f9. The stars are pretty nice looking. So if you know, night photography is something that you like, these stars are pretty nice. Now let's talk about bokeh. And bokeh is quite messy. However, the look of unsharp parts is nice, specifically if they're far from your object. But if we're talking about classic bokeh, it's very strong. Like, it does have very strong and pinchy, like, cat eye effect. It's a little messy. I wouldn't call it the most beautiful bokeh, but I wouldn't call it the ugly bokeh. It's more of a vintage bokeh. So if you are looking for something like an extra tool in your toolbox, photography toolbox, something to change the look of your images, this definitely checks this point. And I actually like the look of it because it reminds me of vintage lenses, and we do use some vintage lenses in our like bags. I mean, me and my wife. So we sometimes like to get this look because it's unique. It's something that other photographers using like typical like Sony 1.4 or Sigma 1.35 or 50 1.4, they just, you know, this bokeh look kind of the same, but here you have something different. I didn't mention focus breathing here, so that's something I want to mention before going to sum up this review. Focus breathing is pretty apparent on this lens, so if you're into some, you know, video work, you may want to consider that. However, nothing of a deal breaker, but that's something to have in mind. So to sum up, is that impossible to take like great photos with this lens despite its optical flaws? Absolutely not. This lens is producing very interesting images, and you can use it in your in your photo sessions. You can use it as if photography is your hobby, you can definitely use this lens to create some like interesting effects that will make a difference on Instagram, on social media platforms. But if you're into client work, you can use it with your clients. The only thing is to understand what this lens is designed for, and to me it is designed for typical portrait photography. Of course you can use it in low light, but of course also in a bright day with some nice like, you know, bokeh in the background. This creates a very dreamy effect, and with all these flows against the lights and with all these flows of sharpness, you can just close it a little bit to 1.4, still getting beautiful images, or 2, getting beautiful and sharp images. Really, this lens gets really sharp there. So there's a variety of situations you can use it for, but once again, you have to know how to make the best out of this lens. Specifically, that back in the days, owning lens that bright 0.95 at that price point was not possible at all, unachievable. So I'm very grateful to Brightin Star that they are brave enough to do it. I'm hoping to see version 2 without this thingy, with some improved optical quality, but still not waiting for version 2. You can easily pick this one up and create some beautiful portrait work. And don't be afraid of using it, because the sharp image is not everything, is not God, right? So you can have good enough images, very interesting images produced with this lens. So I hope you guys like this review. Please leave thumbs up, comments below, subscribe. It helps me a lot, gives me wings, and I see you guys in the next recording. Cheers.